People who do not read books for pleasure. Why do you not? Mostly because my attention span is terrible. I reread most pages. I can do objective-based reading like instructions, educational materials, and just info I need. But with storybooks, my mind wanders easily. Outside distractions aren't even necessary. I'll just start daydreaming as soon as my mind thinks of something slightly more interesting. By the time I snap out of it, I forgot what I had just read. But it also takes a lot of time and effort to find something I might like, and I have a hard time maintaining interest long enough to figure out if I do like what I'm reading. I have aphantasia and no inner monologue voice. There are some book series that I do love to read, but it's hard to find books that keep my interest. A story needs to pique my interest right away. Since I don't picture anything, I just read the words and that's it. No imagining the world or coming up with a voice for characters. I can't keep focus well on books that have long descriptions or move at a slow pace, and I like when there's a lot of spoken dialogue. So if I don't find the story or main character pretty much immediately interesting, I just won't carry on. I have to write a lot for work, so I assume that reading at home for fun doesn't appeal to me due to always reading. With that said, I spend a lot of time consuming information online in my spare time, constantly learning new hobbies and visiting their related forums or reading materials that will help me learn. This question and my answer also makes me realize that books are a slow way of consuming information. I used to read them all the time when I was young, and there was no internet easy access to the information I really wanted. I started reading for pleasure a lot less, and I started to work as an editor. I read all day at work. I just wasn't in the mood to read when I got home. I started listening to audiobooks instead. The interesting thing is that I really prefer a different genre when listening. I like mysteries, I think because I know the pattern formula the book will follow. I do bring a book when I travel. It usually light fiction. The last thing I read on paper was the Bridgerton book that the newest season of the show will be about. I don't get pleasure from it. A part of it is that I have always had trouble keeping track of characters with TV and film. There's a physical reference to help there. I also find that I have too many questions about context setting that often takes way too long to provide when I'm reading. I started college for the first time in my 40s. And enjoy reading Shakespeare for the first time, and reading a few classics, the Metamorphoses, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, but was glad the classes ended. It is very difficult for my brain to both read and to try to create a picture at the same time. This makes reading fiction books nearly impossible for me. Very curiously, many types of non-fiction are accessible. I wish I understood the mechanism. Listening to someone else read allows my brain to focus on one thing, and I can read fiction books that way. I actually enjoy them. But that requires me finding an acceptable audio rendition, or someone willing to read the book aloud to me. It's just not very enjoyable for me. If I had nothing else, I would read that's about it. Even fast readers are pretty slow compared to experiencing an equivalent tale visually. I'd rather spend 10 hours watching TV with vivid colors and surround sound than spend 20 hours reading an equivalent story. Or I'd rather spend 2,100 hours experiencing the story interactively inside a video game. I find those other activities to be more enjoyable, so I do them instead. I have read several books on true murders. The problem is many books that write about true murders are boring. They just lay out facts frankly. Don't color up their vocabulary. I want to be entertained, not bored to sleep. That being said, The Butcher by Philip Kahlo is a great read. It is about Tommy Karate Pitero who chopped his victims into 6 pieces and buried them so deep on Staten Island, cadaver dogs couldn't find them. He was a hitman for the Italian mafia. I used to love escaping into a new book more than any other activity, including gaming. X2OB, me level of focus I used to have to reading, and I find myself less able to imagine the world I'm reading about, as IRL stresses and concerns are too prevalent and edge their way into my consciousness. Mindfulness exercises help. I mostly use visual media now to unwind, like games and movies. I do enjoy reading, but as far as non-fiction goes, it is a very inefficient way of consuming information. Not only is the act of reading slow, but there's tons of authored filler compared to other mediums. If I want to learn something more quickly, I'll try videos or audio first. For entertainment, it's good, but similarly time-consuming. The average fiction book honestly just isn't really worth the time investment compared to something else. I love reading fantasy, but I remember this one annoying lady who had some sort of superiority complex, and she detested reading fictional work. Someone made her feel stupid, childish and naive, so she needed to make everyone else feel that way by attacking adults with any kind of hobby she deemed infantile. If you liked video games, anime, or the like, you needed to grow up according to her. Is to not only read the words, but to also picture the story in my mind. Remember details about the story between reads, and the time it takes to do all this is resources I don't have at the moment. I wish I could be back to the life where I could read daily for pleasure. But alas, all the time I have to read is spent reading textbooks for classes. I used to love reading books. When I was a kid, could finish a 300-page book in approximately 3 hours, but I guess I just grew out of it, and it was replaced by other interests. Also, my reading pace has gotten slower to 3 days for one book, which might be a factor and source of discouragement. I do still definitely read some, but it's all mostly online. I prefer writing more now, though. Combination of a fried attention span and autism. Because of my tiny-ass attention span, a book does not keep me stimulated enough to enjoy reading. 1. My autism is just making this worse, as I will find it a lot more painful to do something I don't really enjoy a lot more than a neurotypical person. So in conclusion, for me, reading a book for an extended period of time is torture. Used to love to read, but I am a slow reader. About a book a month. And then I got on this slump where I would start a book and get 50 pages in and just not want to read it anymore, so I basically quit. Add streaming TV, Reddit, TikTok, Twitter, and forget it. I miss having a book that I couldn't wait to get in bed and read. I just don't have the patience anymore to try. My dad forced me to read when I 32 was as a kid, literally with a timer. Had I known that graphic novels existed, I would have read them. So yeah, I don't like to read at all. I tried reading my mum's 45-year-old copy of Dune and couldn't get through 20 pages. But that shit is dense as fuck and has like an appendix you need to be reading while you read the book. Also ADHD. I used to be an avid reader. Several years ago I suffered a TBI that made me practically illiterate until I healed, which took over a year. Because of that, I got out of the habit of reading and just haven't really picked it back up. One exception: 2 years ago I went on a 14-day beach vacation and I read 3 books. I am hoping to do the same on an upcoming trip. So I read for pleasure, but rarely. In the last 5 years, I've read between 2 to 4 books each year. There are 2 main reasons. For work, I have to read a lot, and so I generally don't want to read more in my spare time. Secondly, I prefer more interactivity, so I tend toward playing video games as a primary hobby, usually RPGs, because they have a lot of story. I used to, back in middle and high school, I was a big-time reader, and then went through another bog reading phase from 23 to 25, but I don't think I've read a book in close to 10 years now. I feel like social media has absolutely destroyed my attention span. I'm barely even able to finish a movie, or even a serial TV show these days. I used to read for pleasure all the time. As I got older, my reading has gone away from pleasure reading to reading more technical manuals for my hobbies, and reading law books and cases and such for my day job. There's really not much time left to read for pleasure, although I still get a pleasure reading what I do read. I've never enjoyed the act of reading a book. I would rather do anything than sit in a quiet room reading a book. I don't like silence. I always have the stereo or TV on. If there's music on when I'm reading, it's always more interesting, and my mind wanders. I do enjoy both fiction and non-fiction. I listen to audiobooks. I have the same question, but for people who read books. I'm not saying books are bad or anything. I just don't get it. I can read, but when I read books, it's just like nothing. I don't know how to explain it. It's just words maybe. No pictures in my head, but only from books I don't know. I've never had to explain it before. I am lazy and have a short attention span. Plus, I have very high standards and books as fiction very often fall short of them, which makes me reluctant to try new ones. I don't say this as a good thing. I should be less resistant to taking a chance on a new thing. I'm the same with TV, video games, and movies. Pfui. I have other stuff I do in my spare time. I'll play tennis or video games or go on social media, and those tend to be more pleasurable for someone like me with a short attention span otherwise. Reading for me requires a lot of focus and effort. Unless it's a self-help book, I find those very easy to read. I'm an avid reader, both fiction and technical. However, ever since getting COVID, it hurts to read. I can't explain it better. Just this high level of anxiety I have to push through. I still try to push at it from time to time, but 90% of the joy of reading is gone. Hopefully it comes back. Honestly, choice paralysis. I get overwhelmed and there are too many options, so I eventually decide not to make a decision. In order to find a book that I might like, I would spend more time trying to decide on the perfect book to read than it would actually take me to read a book. I will just read the words, sentences a million times, then understand what they are saying. It's like the words don't connect with my brain that needs to comprehend. I hate it because I buy books wanting to read, then realize how hard it is, but I guess practice makes perfect, right? I have aphantasia and can't see the story in my mind as I read it. I'm literally just reading words on a page and nothing connects in my head. So it's impossible to follow character development or get a sense of the scenery. It's rather boring for me.